This workshop is titled Writing Skills for Reluctant Writers, and it's full of ideas for those youngsters who struggle to get their ideas down on paper. The particular focus, which is so typical of our dyslexic youngsters, are those guys who they've got great ideas, they talk a great narrative, they are always there in the oral part of the lesson, but they just hate writing it down. So let's have a look at some of the reasons why they hate writing it down, and then come up with some solutions. This again will all be in the context of my keynote. This is about metacognition. It's about knowing what works for you. It's about self-efficacy. It's proving to you that you can do it. And it's also about feedback to make learning visible. So there are lots of strands that tie in with this idea of boosting the quality of inclusive classroom practice. Experience suggests there are really three reasons why dyslexic learners in particular are reluctant writers. And it's all centered around cognitive overload. I've just noticed there's a deliberate spelling mistake there. Okay, so we'll move on swiftly. Too many ideas is the first problem that we have to deal with. It's rarely not enough. Dyslexic youngsters are just having so many ideas whizzing past their, or through and past their brains, and getting that sorted out can be a problem. And of course, what makes it even worse is that the ideas never ever come up in the right order. Dyslexic learners are not typically beginning, middle, end thinkers. They're as likely to come up with a solution, the end solution first, the middle bit last, and all the other bits all over the place. So there's a problem as well. And then we come to the crunch one. Having got our ideas roughly sorted in some sort of order, how on earth do we start? Now, that's the bad news. The good news, of course, is that actually only three things getting in the way. So let's try and deal with those three things, and we'll get some good writing. I love teaching writing to dyslexic learners. It's incredibly rewarding because you watch them suddenly believe, hey, you know what? I can do this. So let's set the big picture first of all. And to model the writing process, we'll go through a series of steps. Generating ideas, we're going to use a group brainstorm. It seems to be the most efficient way I've come across. Step 2 will be a multisensory selection and ordering of ideas. Because we're going to brainstorm using Postits, we can get our hands on what we're going to order. And we'll also offer an appropriate planning tool. It could be a mind map, could be a storyboard, could be a flowchart. Once we've got our ideas ordered, we'll add some value. Once we've added value, we will present an appropriate scaffold or framework together with optional paragraph starter phrases. This gets around the issue of I can't get started. Step 5 is critical. This is the talking phase. And then step 6 is the writing phase. These 6 steps really need to be followed sequentially. You can't really mess about with the order. You can reduce the time, but they need to be followed through in that sort of an order. Slide 7. Step 1 then, brainstorming. Thinking without boundaries. The idea is to generate ideas, solutions, approaches quickly, which is where brainstorming works so well. Groups 3 to 5, no more. The trick here is to nominate a scribe or recorder. If you're using small Post-it notes, which is what I would advocate, the little ones about the size of a credit card, or I know Asda's do a nice stack size. Get the group to nominate a scribe or a recorder. Suggest it wants to be somebody who writes pretty quickly. Initially, everybody wants to be the recorder because they get Post-it envy, but you can sort that out. And the idea is, of course, that the group fires ideas at the scribe who records. And the idea is one idea per note. Simple as that. It could be just one word on a note. We're just looking for one idea per note. The key principles of brainstorming are really quite important. It is important to get this right. The youngest I've done this with is 7-year-olds. It could be done with younger, I'm quite sure. It just happened to be the youngest group that I've worked with. So no discussion, that's the key thing. It really, really is important not to allow discussion. We just want ideas fired out. And basically, if it's said, it's recorded. And it's important to record it, even if it's irrelevant or seemingly irrelevant or even stupid. If it is irrelevant, it can be discarded later on. Excuse me. Please insist that the scribe does all the recording. Sometimes scribes want to hand the notes out around the group, and that completely negates the whole process, because the principle here is that one idea said out loud will trigger other ideas. If people are writing independent Post-its, you don't get that cross-fertilization. Short and sharp. I said a couple of minutes. What I would do is watch the groups. And once they've got 10, 12 ideas, you can move on to the next phase. So discussion will take place next, but definitely not at this time. Multisensory select and order is something which works really well. It fits in very well with the way dyslexic youngsters like to learn. The brainstorming produces this random, unfiltered sort of set of ideas. So we want now to create some sort of a framework or a scaffold. We can give them a framework first, next, after that, so on. We can give them some paragraph headings, and the idea really is to stick the relevant notes under the headings, and then once they've done that, they'll decide how they order the information. So we're really doing it step by step, chunk by chunk, bit by bit. And what we're trying to do is to avoid cognitive overload. The Post-it brainstorm deals with the issue of too many ideas. They just come out and they're all randomly dropped on the table. The ideas never come out in the right order, but it's okay, because we're going to do a multisensory select and order. And then we'll deal with the issue of not being able to get started, because we will develop some generic paragraph starters or offer a suitable framework. So I'm going to model exactly how I would do this with a group. We're going to go to the island, and what I'm not going to do is give an objective, a title, anything at all. I'm going to dive straight into this because I want a bit of intrigue to come from it. And what I am going to do is give each group a piece of A3 paper. And I usually say, right, nominate your table artist. That's usually good for a bit of a debate. Whoever it is, I ask them to draw a map with an interesting shape. Now, I give a model that you can use my model, or you can do one of your own. While that's going on, while the artist is drawing the interesting shape, I give instructions to the rest of the group, and I say to them, when your artist is finished, ask your artist to put a cross somewhere on the coast, drop a treasure chest in somewhere else, and then draw an interesting route from the cross on the coastline to the treasure chest. And it's pretty obvious by now we're creating a treasure map. Doing it this way engages the rest of the group while the artist is doing the initial drawing. That's really all that's necessary. And then we ask them to turn the map over. And I can't emphasize how important this is. If you don't get the artist to turn the map over, they'll spend the next 20 minutes drawing mountains, volcanoes, palm trees, heaven knows what, which is lovely, but it's not what we want at this moment. So we'll turn the map over. This is a typical map. You can see the cross, you can see the treasure chest, and a route from A to B. Lovely. So we've done our brainstorm. What I say to my group is, okay, imagine then you are going to go from the beach to the treasure. And what I want you to think about is all the things you might see, experience, encounter, run away from, solve on your route from the cross on the beach to the treasure. And what you're going to do is you'll shout out your ideas. Your scribe will write them on separate Post-its and stick them on the table. And the ground rule here is one word, usually a noun, or a picture per Post-it. So if somebody were to say erupting volcano, we just put down volcano. That's all we do. Somebody says deep valley, we just write valley. We will add extra words as we go. I always give ideas, pictures, to kickstart the imagination. And I say, feel free to use my ideas if it helps. So what I'll do is I'll run you through a quick slideshow. I do many more than this, but it'll give you the idea. If I was working nonfiction, and we will look at nonfiction afterwards, again, I will make sure that I'm giving people a bank of ideas that they can draw on and use or not. So I would say to them, okay, you might say, okay, somewhere between the landing on the beach and getting to the treasure, we'll see a volcano. That's great. We might go through a gorge. Quicksand, always good. There might be a temple. That's always good. Always interesting things can happen in a temple. You might encounter an anaconda and have to deal with that. Bats. Could be a waterfall. Dinosaurs. Well, why not? It's your island. You can have what you like. Always popular. A swamp. And these are triggering past experience, prior knowledge. They'll have seen loads and loads of stuff on Netflix and whatever, all engaged with these sorts of ideas. So the ideas are really beginning to flow. So now we go to our initial brainstorm. We have our scribe, pen or pencil poised over a pack of Post-its. The group are firing ideas in. Your dyslexic youngsters will be right in the fore of this. Their imaginations are almost bursting. And that's really what it looks like. We just write and stick, write and stick, write and stick. And really that brainstorm can take less than a minute sometimes, and they get so excited. It will be noisy. This is not a quiet activity, but don't worry. Now let's select an order. So what we're going to do is to say, right, let's choose your best 5 ideas and let's stick them on the table in the best order in which to engage with them. Okay, and that just let them loose on that. It shouldn't take long. There'll be lots of discussion, and they'll be moving Post-its around till they get an order that works for them. Now we'll ask them to turn the page over again, because it's creating our route and adding some value time. So what we're going to ask them to do is to take the 5 stickies that they decided are going to be the best for their story and stick them on the route in the best places for them to happen. You'll notice here that the group are using rather larger Post-its than I would wish. Half the size of that is better. What you'll then see, of course, is that we've used smaller Post-it notes, so we can add some value to our nouns. So we're looking at adjectives here. So we've got a dilapidated bridge, we've got a slippery high wire, a rogue pirate, sludgy quicksand, and sulfuric volcano. You might want to ask for 2 adjectives, by all means. Ground rules here would be, once you've used an adjective, you can't use it again. That's always good. And I would ban big, little, and nice for obvious reasons. So we're now beginning to really get an order. We've thought without boundaries. We've done some select and order. We've now got pretty much a plan. The story is beginning to take shape. Here we can see an example where there've been a couple of Post-its used, and what we say, a couple of Post-its to add value. And what we say is that you don't have to use both of them. When the time comes to write your story, you can use these or not. You can use both of them. You can use one of them. You can use none of them. But the idea is that the group effort is producing this really quite potentially good piece of work. This is the crunch bit, really, for me. We've done all our thinking. We've stuck our Post-its on. And what we're aiming for is individual writing from a group mind map. Here, it's only going to work if we talk it. And I would strongly urge you to consider a policy within your school, whether it's primary or secondary or FE for that matter, which is that nobody actually writes anything until they've talked it out in some shape or form. It's the talking that makes it all work. So what we're going to do is say to the scribe, in a minute, I want you to start the story, and I'll give you some guidance. And then the idea is that the scribe will point around the story, around the route from incident to incident. And as that happens, the rest of the group are going to chime in and tell the best story they can out loud. And a word to the wise here, this must not be written down. What we're looking for is ultimately individual writing from the group whole. If we allow somebody to write down the story as it's told, everybody will want to copy down that story, and so it completely negates the process. The talking is such an important phase. Anarchy works best. You can destroy it by somebody saying, well, look, you say that one, I'll say this one, and then somebody else can say the next one. What you want is everybody chipping in. They can move Post-its now, they can add words, they can add ideas. It becomes organic, and once again, pretty noisy. So it's now time to give a helping hand to reduce cognitive load. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give a starter sentence or a starter phrase, which may or may not be used. It's the choice of the group. And I'm also going to give what I've called generic paragraph starters, which in this context can be generic sentence starters as well. So as we crawled up the beach, the first thing we saw was a rogue pirate in the distance. We were amazed that he should be there, and we decided to follow him. Now, what I'd like you to notice is that the only words that are on the map are rogue pirate. All the other words have come from my imagination. And because I've had a sentence starter, because I've got paragraph starters, because I've got the ideas in front of me, I've got headroom to use my imagination. And while this is going on, other people are chipping in with ideas as well. They say, oh, he could be an ugly pirate. He could only have one leg, and all this is coming in at the same time, which is great. So let's continue. We decided to follow him down the track at a distance. Suddenly, the pirate seemed to be getting shorter. We could not believe it. So we crept up. And to our amazement, we realized that he had walked into sludgy quicksand. And again, most of that stuff isn't on the page. It's coming from my imagination. So this continues until they've told the whole story. And then we come to the write-up phase, which is really what we wanted in the first place. While they're doing the talking, I'm usually going around and I'm giving out writing books or paper, depending on how we're doing it. And what I try to do is make sure that the writing books are open to the place they're going to start. And if I'm using paper, I will sometimes actually print on it the date, the title, whatever we're going to use, so that they're not going to be distracted. Because once they finish talking, I will say to them, get your book, get your piece of paper, get your pen ready, pencil ready, count down a couple of lines, put it on the line, yeah, ready, steady, write. And you know what? They will. You can kill this by insisting that they write down the date, the lesson, the objective, and all that sort of stuff. And of course, some of our youngsters have developed a skill of spending all lesson to do that anyway. So we'll do that afterwards. And they're off. Now, while that's going on, keep an eye out for anybody who's stuck, because there will still be one or two. Watch out for the 1,000-meter stare. And if you spot somebody with a 1,000-meter stare, then you can sidle up to them and you can say to them, what do you want to write? They'll tell you. And I would suggest you say to them, can I write it for you? Oh, yes, please. So you write down whatever it is. As we crawled up the beach, the first thing we saw was the rogue pirate. Write that for them. And then you say, what do you want to write next? He only had one leg and he was very ugly. Okay, I will write, he only had one, and I'll give the pen back. And you know what? They're away. Sequentially, throughout the writing period, heads will pop up, spot them, ask if you can do the writing. Often, all they need to do is talk it out, and they're away. And experience suggests that for many youngsters, this will be the best writing they've done. It tends to happen at 3 levels. This is what Pi Corbett would say. Your weakest writers will imitate the story that was spoken, and it'll be great. It'll be the best writing they've done. Your middle sort of band writers, they will innovate. They'll take the basic idea and they'll add value to it. It'll be good too. Your best writers will invent. They'll go off on a tangent and be as good as always. But we're talking about reluctant writers, and the value added for them is usually huge. So this is about thinking without boundaries. Then we order and we select, we add value, and you know what? It works a treat. It needs practicing so that ultimately it just becomes the process they use, and it has real application in tests and exams, especially if they have extra time, because they can use the extra time to go through a bit of a brainstorm, a bit of a mind map, a bit of a self-talk before they write. What about non-fiction? Because obviously that is the majority of the writing we do in school is non-fiction. So evidence of learning here, what happened during a Viking raid? Why were they so successful? That's my question. And I'm offering a range of evidence that I'm prepared to accept, very much in the spirit of universal design for learning. Multiple representations will be acceptable. Paragraphs, definitely. Any of those will do. Sometimes I will ban paragraphs. I'm sorry, you can't do it in paragraphs. You have to do it in a different way. And sometimes I will say it must be bullet points. It must be a mind map. It must be whatever. So we've set the question. In this case, we want to get some writing out of them, but again, we're going to do it through multiple representation. Here is the passage we're going to use as our basis for writing. This is going to be effectively a précis of this passage. And it's about 200 and odd words at the moment. So this is the one I'm going to use. And in the next slide, what we can see is I've highlighted information. What happened during a Viking raid? Why were they so successful? And what we've done here is we've highlighted everything which is relevant to that question. And then following this principle of cognitive load light, I'm going to offer two organizing frameworks for this piece of writing. I'm going to offer a mind map and a flowchart. And these two are going to be actually made available stuck onto A3 paper, so that the youngsters don't have to do any drawing, don't have to do any writing. They can just start to work with them for reasons which I'll make plain in a minute. So there are my two options. You can choose one or the other. Sometimes I might insist that you use one or the other. It will depend on who I'm working with. This is the reason why actually it's well worth giving them a scaffold or framework, because this was a very bright youngster who spent so much time on the artwork that she had no time at all left to process the information. And that will happen if you're not careful. On the other hand, this one worked really well. This was another one where I let them loose. But in this case, he didn't spend too much time on the drawing, but he began to get his ideas down. They're using the who, what, why, where, when formula. And this time what they're doing is they've taken the highlighted stuff from the passage, put each piece on a Post-it, and now they're dropping it on the map in the right place. That one is probably quite self-explanatory. That's working really well. Here is a linear one, exactly the same. That's working beautifully. Who, what, why, where, when. Absolutely great. Yep, that's going to be fine. Once we've got our map sorted out, then we go through exactly the same process as we went through in the fiction piece. We're going to tell a story. We're going to say, okay, we're going to explain what happened during a Viking raid and why the Vikings were so successful. And the first thing that happened in a Viking raid was next after that, and so on. Exactly the same process. When to start a new paragraph can be a bit of an issue, and I find the tip-tap mnemonic works quite well. The tip is the easy, or if you like, the simpler version. So you start a new paragraph when the time changes, so that's first, next, and so on. When you change the idea, the next thing to consider, or when a new person comes in, well, let's say we talk about the Viking leader. So there will be our paragraphs. More sophisticated is the tap bit of tip-tap. So we start a new topic. Having dealt with this, we move on. That works well. Advert is very powerful. Our dyslexic youngsters often grab this one. Imagine this is a documentary script. Where would we put an advert break? Where's a natural pause, but people want to come back for more? Place, we move to a new place. And another one, which came from one of my dyslexic learners, he said, well, I start a new paragraph when I change the picture in my head. I effectively switch to the next episode. So here's something I put together for FE, and it was health and safety considerations. And that first, next, after that sequence works really, really well for an explanation. Generally speaking, your learners will know exactly what they want to say. It's getting the information sequenced which is causing the problem. And if they have Post-its they can drop against starters, then the whole thing becomes much more organic and it works well. So here, what I've done then is I will have dropped that centerpiece, the picture and the first, next, after that onto a piece of A3 paper, stuck it on. And then what the learners will do is stick their Post-its on, add value to create the mind map in exactly the same way as we did with the island story. Appeal can work well. I was hesitant. I was almost not going to actually put this in, although I'm very much in favor of it, because it often has been very, very badly taught. By that I mean it hasn't been taught often enough, long enough, and thoroughly enough before we let youngsters loose. But for our reluctant writers, this can be great, because what we're doing now is giving you a real structure to make the whole thing work. So Peel is point, evidence, explain, link. And by working their way across the grid, you will find youngsters will begin now to produce really coherent and meaningful writing. The next slide. Here I've got one which is again from FE, the causes of accidents on building sites. And what I've done is I've used the arrows to show again how we can just pick up these starter phrases and take it on. The quality of writing once the starter phrases are in is hugely improved. I've always been amazed at how much better it is. These peels, by the way, if you Google peel in Google Images, there are thousands. So once again, if we can actually turn it into a framework for our youngsters, let's keep the idea of building sites or accidents. So here we have point one, a main cause is, and now we've got our evidence, explain combination. That works well for older primary into secondary. So we make a point, we come up with the evidence, we explain, and we link. And the next link, from that link, we have evidence again. From point two, we explain it, there's the link again. The whole thing goes round. In conclusion, whatever it's going to be. And once again, this is talked. We talk it out loud first. We talk it in the group. We add value. We move things around. And once that's been done, the guys will write it really well. Here we are, stuck on a big piece of paper. And the yellow squares are the sticky notes stuck on, which are the product of our brainstorm. Then we talk it. And then we write it. Exactly the same as before. This has to be modeled regularly, frequently, revisited so that it becomes automatic. But once it's become automatic, what you will find is that it just becomes the way they work. And because it's the way they work, they will modify it, enhance it, improve it as they go, and it just becomes the way they do it. I've used this technique, as I say, with 7-year-olds right through to master students and primary, secondary, FE, as I say, it really does make a difference. So please give it a go. The talking is an issue, and it does need to be taught in a sense. So if you imagine that you actually had created, a group had created this mind map, learning how to talk a mind map is a skill. Learning how to talk a flowchart is a skill. And it's one that it's well worth practicing. So if I was going to start with mindset for this one, I would be saying, I would give it a starter sentence. There are a number of strategies for whole food, plant-based living. An important one is mindset. It is so important to focus on one meal at a time rather than worry about what you're going to be eating day after day. If you do slip up, it isn't a problem because you can make up for it later in the day or the next day. It really doesn't matter. What is so crucial, though, is to see it as a series of baby steps. Don't try and do everything at once. Don't try and change everything at once. For example, you might consider introducing one new recipe a week. So that would be that mindset one. And from there, you might want to talk about shopping, or you might want to talk about don't go hungry. But learning how to talk, this map is an important process, and it's well worth modeling it, you modeling it, and giving them no stakes opportunities to talk it out. And modeling the framework in Appeal, as I've done, as I've said, once we've talked it, it's going to go. So this will work exactly the same way. Discussing the causes. So the main cause of accidents is we've got our statistics, we've got our reason, we've got our links. Once they've talked it, they're ready to write it. So we talk it. Possible sentence starter on the screen. You might give them a couple for choice. Be prepared to write out the sentence starter for some youngsters, and then they write it out. They get going on their own. And as I said for the previous piece, watch out for the stuck writer. Offer to write in, type in what they want to say. Key phrase is what you're going to say next, and usually they're away. So the issue I've been dealing with is great ideas, talks a great narrative, absolutely hates writing it down. And my takeaway strategies, plenty of modeling and teacher talk from us. We do the thinking without boundaries with Postits, multisensory select and order. Another spelling mistake there, sorry about that. Add value later, talk it out, and I'll be disappointed if you are not thrilled and your learners are not thrilled with the quality of writing that comes from it. So this has been my workshop for Dyslexia Scotland, and I hope you've enjoyed it.